Welcome to Worlds Unbound. Make sure to visit the story page on Royal Road to support the author, or to follow along. Link in the description. Video created with permission from author. Shift. A Shounen Battle Series. By Eytha. Chapter 1 Stained Sand. Rumble, a shake, perhaps an earthquake. Everything shook violently. A void covered all in a thick blanket, immovable and heavy. Unknown pressure crushed inward, threatening bone and muscle alike. From every direction, the world leapt into the air. It heaved like a wave, fluid and rippling, yet unnatural. Earthquakes were a far too common experience for him. Each shake felt distant and close at the same time, as though separated from his body. Could it have been an out-of-body experience? Did his soul escape with a partial tether attached to his mortal coil? The earthquake bounced him. Bounced? Bounce isn't the right verb in this context. The supposed shaking came from two other small bodies bouncing on his bed. "All right, you two, I'm awake." Fairly promptly the bouncing ceased, though he felt their sudden movement closer to him. Just before they considered maybe jumping more, he sprung up with a playful roar to a well-planned and clearly masterfully executed scare. "Morning!" chirped Ken, stone cold in reaction, but still beaming with energy only a 10-year-old could still manage. Without a verbal reaction of his own, June clapped to provide that as his morning greeting. A slight blank vacant stare came from the youngest brother, but still managed to share something close to Ken's energy behind his soft blue eyes. June came off more like an explosion contained tightly in a high-energy shield, safe and not escaping, but no less full of vigor. "Already used to that, huh?" Such a poor reception left him sweating a little as they tried to bore holes into him with their overeager eyes. "I think I hear Momo calling. Let her know I'm awake, okay you two?" "Okay. Let's go tell Sis we did a good job." Ken took June's hand and guided him off the bed. It only took 1 foot on the ground before they sprinted like rival mechs down a city street to exit his room. The stacks of manga and light novels buildings to be dodged, hopefully. Stretching out his hand to the escaping two, his mouth barely opened for a warning before it was already too late. They grazed a couple of already poorly stacked books near the door. Slowly falling with them, it made for a fairly dramatic scene as the door threatened their exit strategy. The two young siblings squeezed through the closing door in time for the movie climax finish and left the room in a bit more of a mess. Chapter 1 Stained Sand. After breakfast and morning routines, he stopped by a small memorial shrine. Within the small simple wood box frame were 2 framed portraits of an adult man and woman smiling. Closing his eyes, he pressed his hands together, giving silent morning greetings to the two. For but a moment, the constant light positive smile lowered from his lips, repainted in a thin pinched line. Ready, he walked out of their house on the corner, a modest-sized 4-bedroom 2-story modern Japanese home. Brush strokes of sun drew down through the few trees that still remained within the urban concrete jungle of metropolitan Japan. A quick jog past the well-worn potted plants and simple flowers of their small front property sent him on his way to school. A light hum escaped his lips as he walked with a small bounce in his step. A school bag slung over his shoulder hung in place by 3 fingers. Cool winds blew through his not-quite shoulder-length hair, pulling his gaze up to the clear blue skies painted soft gradients down to the skyline of downtown. It would have felt more like spring with pink blossoms raining down like a star shower splattered over the azure canvas. But he lived with the imperfect view. Behind him, a distant voice called to him. Their familiar voice cleared up his dream fog. "Yuki! Wait up!" He turned around to find 2 female classmates and childhood friends approaching at a brisk pace. "Ayumi! You're doing well keeping up with Saki." A rough smile stretched over her cheeks as the sweat managed to stay hidden by her long tan-toned hair. She paused a couple meters from Yuki, slightly bent over, attempting to keep her lack of exercise from his sights. Slowly recovering herself, she straightened back up, letting her hime-style hair fall on her shoulders. Small crochet lotus blossom hair pins tied the strands of hair in front of her to each side, kept out of her sight. Sorry, we're late. No, that's alright, Saki. I guess I got lost in thought and just started walking. Saki suddenly stretched out her hand, grabbing at something on his head. And through trees, apparently, she remarked, giving him a sakura petal. Huh! But there's no sakura trees around here. Double-checking the neighborhood of his childhood, his memory didn't lie to him. Weird, I wonder where it came from. Just keep your feet firmly on the ground for the rest of the walk. Reaching school, Yuki separated from his friends. He took an outside path towards the back of the school grounds. Just ahead of him, past the sports fields, stood the library. But before he could take another step, his feet became sluggish. Huh! Yuki noticed sand covered everything in front of him. Turning around, he looked at the surroundings and the distance. The sand rose up in mounds like dunes. It nearly looked like a painting, being so picturesque. However, a cold creeping sensation ebbed through the air. I know this feeling. Someone's watching. They're looking for blood. It's so thick in the air. He swallowed slowly, the weight of the air constricting his throat. This isn't normal, stating the obvious. Shut up, narrator. Yuki backed away to where the sand ended. The contrast of sand to grass came sharply. It looked as if an invisible cylinder held it up. The hell? I really wish things would start making sense soon. It's starting to feel like a really elaborate prank. You're not the only one. A bored, slightly deeper voice came from above him and back towards the sand. The sand suddenly moved. No revealed more of itself. It was as if two worlds overlapped and the circle exposed one. Worse for him, the sand swallowed up his legs. An unknown man stepped down out of the sky about 3 meters above him. Yuki didn't even know where to start. The fact that a man somehow walked on air like it was stairs. Or perhaps they weren't Japanese, but instead American, and not even in style for them. It felt like they walked out of a fantasy novel, wearing white robes draped over his body. And they spoke perfect Japanese as if a native. The stranger landed on the sand finally, and stared down at the trapped Yuki. I could have killed you a dozen times over at this point, watching you flail about. Kill? Why? For someone supposedly so gifted, I had hoped you were just hiding your abilities secreted away here in Japan. But this has been quite the disappointment. I guess that's why I was sent, rather insulting if you think about it. Pulling on his leg, Yuki felt it give a little, but it would take more than he feared the talkative man planned to allow. I've got to keep him talking. I need to escape. Yuki roughed up his hair a little, putting on an embarrassed fake smile for the man. I tend to have that effect on people. Don't have a very high opinion of yourself. What can I say? I'm a high school student. For a student, you're pretty calm. Twisting and nudging, a little of his leg freed up. Not the first time for me. Well, this specific situation, this is very much a first time. Like who goes around seeing sand appearing on a daily basis? Besides you. Besides me. Yeah, you get it. I do. Also, you can drop the pretense. Just get yourself free already. I'm tired of waiting. You're an honorable one. Call it a code. I can respect that. No longer keeping it subtle, Yuki knelt down and grabbed his leg, pulling out of the weight and suction of the sand. The impatient stare from the stranger rushed him a little. Once the sand gave up his legs, the ruined plan returned to his mind. There's no escaping this guy. Who is he? Yuki straightened himself out, trying to figure out any options for himself. Before you start with the killing, anything more concrete you want to impart to me? That's not how this works. Yeah, figured as much. If you were actually a book villain, I'd have your whole plan and motivation at this point. I don't even know why you're attacking me, besides being in order. Last chance to actually put in some effort. Oh, trust me, I can put in the effort. He rubbed his hands together to paint a brave front. I say to a guy that I watched walk on air and I'm guessing create this sand and completely upend my concept of what reality is. Panic soaked through his bones. Thankfully, he still felt he could move. What did he have to prepare for? Suddenly, the sand rose up near the stranger's right foot. A mound became a pillar and stretched up to his hand, emitting sand. The moment he grasped it, the sand crystallized and hardened, becoming a metal sword. It had simple artistry with just a couple of emeralds embedded in the hilt, an otherwise clean, functional blade. Yuki took a step back, having thought he prepared himself for anything, and still came out surprised. How is any of this working? He frantically looked around for anything that might work for defense, but sand covered everything. I thought we were having a fist fight. I'm ending this, since you're not willing to be serious. Serious how? You made a sword out of sand and walked on air. What fantasy do you even come from? Enough talk. The stranger dashed forward, covering the short distance with grace and speed. Yuki only had a moment to react with anything before the sword would be in striking distance. Still holding on to some sand from when he pulled his legs free, he tossed it into the air at the charging stranger. Blood sprayed through the air and painted the sun-soaked sand crimson arcs. To his surprise, nearly the moment that he released the sand, it all just disappeared. With his hand out in reach, the sword's blade found his fingers and stole half of 3 of them. Screaming flooded through his arm and around his body in a way he had never experienced. Shit! Yuki clenched his fist tightly in an attempt to staunch the bleeding. He knelt down, biting back the pain. This is all real. It seemed obvious, but part of him still hoped for a dream or prank. He forced his eyes back open after blinking tightly. His teeth ground together, pushing himself to focus. You really didn't think I had a law for that? Catching sight of the foreigner taking another step towards him, Yuki braced his hand on the sand and kicked out his leg in a large sweep. The surprise strike bought him enough time to get distance, and with any luck escape. Forcing himself to his feet, Yuki sprinted to the edge of the sand as he remembered it. You're not escape! Groaned the man with a spear in hand, already moving to throw it. He pushed for the border as he tilted his head back. In a tight window, Yuki turned at the edge while the spear flew through the air. Leaning back just enough, he lifted up his hand in weak defense as the spear vanished nearly upon hitting his bloody palm. TCH. Left seems to be your only weapon. While Yuki looked to exercise his options, the foreigner changed the situation once more. The previously well-defined border expanded out, revealing ever more sand. If you're not going to fight back, I don't need to keep a tight rein on things. Eyes narrowed and sword in hand, he bore murderous intent. Frustration and disappointment dropped like weights on his back. Sort of figured that might happen, damn it. With the added sand, it showed further dunes completely blocking out his view of the field behind him. A straight path closed off. A pair of voices suddenly crept into his ear. He turned, worried his attacker had some other trick up his sleeve. The answer became much worse. 2 students unknowingly stepped into the man's territory. What the hell is all this? Is that Hayashi? Don't look away from me! The foreigner charged at a distracted Yuki. Unlike with Yuki, the sand did nothing to slow or hamper his steps, as though he ran over a hill rather than a dune. Run now! Get away from here! His back turned to shield them as the sword came humming through the air. Yuki didn't even get to push them away before the blade pierced through his shoulder. Shocked expressions gripped tightly the 2 unfortunate students. Blood splattered over half of their faces. Screams of horror escaped as they fell back. They stared up at Yuki, not even seeing the whole picture. Yuki coughed as pain washed over his body. Blood painted over his cheek. Run! Sweat started to soak through his undershirt along with blood. I'm really going to die. Numbness in his mind dripped slowly down with eerie foreboding. When the sword pulled out, Yuki twisted around as his legs folded. He barely caught himself from completely lying prone. The unknown attacker stood over him with the sword pointed straight at his face. New blood sprayed over Yuki's face with surprise carved into his eyes. Seconds peeled away as he realized it didn't come from himself. The attacker dropped his sword as the entire sand environment scattered into orange motes of light. Forcing himself to focus, he caught a glimpse of the one behind the man. Ayumi! Why? Chapter 2. Hidden Shield. Between him and one of his oldest friends stood a man dying, much like how Yuki felt like at the moment. Though it came as a hard view to take in. Which shocked him more, witnessing a man, a real person, dying in front of him, or seeing a girl he had known to be innocent and sweet completely covered in the man's blood. Painted dark in crimson hues, Ayumi nearly looked like she walked off a horror set. If he had the strength, he would have backed up a little. Confusion along with panic began to crawl over his body. What secret did his friend hide from him? Why did she have such a cold and dispassionate expression drawn over her face? Who attacked him? If she killed once, would she again? What did she want? Questions stacked in his head like reports delivered from a dozen assistants, all demanding equal attention. Yuki doubted even one would get answered. What's Ayumi? New flashes of pain reminded him that his life remained in danger. It jolted his limbs and sucked in air through his teeth. I feel so. Removing the ziphos from within the chest of the assassin, Ayumi stepped back. Emptying her mind of the sword, it faded away along with the rest of the sand field. She promptly changed the law sets within her mind, tasking it with two objectives: eliminating any evidence of the attack along with the assassin, and repairing the damage the mission objective sustained. She firmly marched around the soon-to-be corpse as a blue ripple shot out from her footsteps. Within moments, faint blue particles of light rose up, maintaining a tight formation around her body. The blood once soaking into the school uniform separated from the fabric. Absorbed into the particles, they evaporated into the air, broken down into base atomic components to return back to the natural cycle. Kneeling down next to the wounded, she examined his condition and status of the repair. Bone on the fingers are already reconstructed and bleeding halted. Looks like the shock did more to him than the attacks. While her field worked to restore his body and clean up the blood, she turned to the two civilians that accidentally intruded into the scene. This will be more problematic, but no other way. Stay away from me. I didn't see any you thing. Neither could escape. Manacles from the ground tied both firmly to their locations. With their voices unable to breach her territory, she had the time to consider her mission. Ayumi walked stoically towards the two. No hint of a menacing presence, yet they didn't need one considering what they witnessed. Both cried and pleaded for their lives. Slowly kneeling down between the two, she placed a hand over their eyes. You walked around the gym continuing to talk uninterrupted until you returned. The flailing and screaming from the two quieted to a still silence. Released from their restraints, she left them alone. Confirming the assassin's body completely broken down, she returned to her objective. The wounds finished mending themselves. He would recover, though the shock probably would inhibit him. Ayumi reached out, grasping his arm and hefting him back up to his feet. Can you hear me? A sharp, bold voice echoed through the soup of Yuki's mind. It took a moment, but the voice acted like a wind on the fog that numbed his senses. Pulled back on the baited line, his consciousness leapt back into his body. The last few minutes currently missing as he stared at his friend. Ayumi? What are you doing here? He slowly panned his vision around the back of the gym, seeing absolutely nothing. Did I imagine it all? Yuki searched out more carefully for anything disturbed. Nothing. No signs of a prank gone wrong, no bullies getting their laughs off, nothing. Conflicts between his memory, which slowly started to clear up the recent blurs, and reality fought a battle of dual brushes to assert the truth. He didn't know which to believe. And the lack of evidence carved doubt into his mind. Yet, while he considered the offer to forget everything that reality attempted to barter, the truth slapped him with an objection. His knees buckled for a moment, and he lost focus for a moment. A tight hand kept him from collapsing. Why do I suddenly feel so lightheaded? Another pull of gravity rattled him. "W.O.? It's the blood loss. I repaired the wounds, but you still bled out for a minute." "Blood? So all that happened?" The last frames flashed back to him, reminding him of Ayumi killing the man. It jolted him sober. "What the hell's going on, Ayumi? How are you involved in this?" "He's sharper than I guessed. Most don't have the clarity to already just make such connections after a near-death encounter." Scanning the sports team in the distance, she assessed the risk quickly. "This is not the place for such a conversation." "What? You can't." She released his arm. It surprised him how much support she provided him as more than lightheadedness washed over him. Muscle fatigue and low energy slammed his body all at once. The high of adrenaline finally disappeared. For as familiar a feeling as the drop from the high was to him, he never felt so drained before. Looking to Ayumi for help, his childhood friend that he thought he knew just walked away from him. If Saki didn't run to his aid first, she would be next to him before he knew it. Yet she just showed an oddly tall, strong back in silence that demanded he follow, and on his own. "Damn it! I want something to make sense." Running to catch up turned out to just be a fantasy in his mind. His legs completely refused to give him anything more than a sluggish pace, as if he were an old man. And to make matters worse, Ayumi just marched on pretending like he didn't just nearly die. Right, he almost died. He needed to circle back around to that as well. Order of operations, answers from Ayumi came first, if he just caught up to her. "Can you walk slower?" "Injured over here." He hoped that would at least pause her for a response, but nope. "You're not injured. You hardly even fought." "Not sure throwing sand counts as fighting, but daily bullies aren't actually trying to kill me. So my apologies for not being in peak physical condition to defend my life. You're going to want to fix that." "Fix what? Ah, damn it." Hopping a little to force his body into motion, which it really wanted to decline, Yuki got enough brief momentum to carry himself into a light sprint. Each step reverberated through his legs. It all felt worse than he cared to admit to him. Rushing the distance caught him up, though he prayed the future didn't demand interest for the effort. He grabbed Ayumi's wrist. "It should be safe now. Ready to explain yourself?" Half a dozen possible plot theories filled his mind in just the walk. Given time, he'd find tenfold more. Which trope and cliché made the foundation of her lies? The first bell sounded through the grounds, cutting off any further words. Ayumi turned away, heading to the side door. "You can't be serious." She paused, glancing back. "Would you rather be late and raise questions from Saki? You obviously have many questions, and for now the danger's past. When we won't draw unwanted attention, I'll answer you." "Damn it." Immediately, his mind conjured striking imagery of Saki filled with panic running through the halls. She'd probably shake down half the bullies in the school. Against my better judgment, after school. Afternoon couldn't come soon enough for Yuki. Once his obligations to the class ended, he disappeared swiftly with Ayumi. Unfortunately, those delays cost him his moment. "Hey Yuki!" called out a familiar voice. Tilting his head, Yuki confirmed Hiroshi hurried over with Kazuhiro and Tatsuya behind him. It completely slipped his mind that they would be meeting him today. He turned to his approaching friends. "Right, it's Tuesday. Saki's got after-school practice. We'll pick this up later." Before Hiroshi got too close to notice anything, Yuki straightened up and pulled back up the usual smile he carried around for everyone. "Hiroshi! You guys were able to find me. You did sort of just ninja yourself out of the class. I thought you were on cleaning duty. I've been practicing the art. Glad to see it worked." "I don't know about that, I still found you. And here I thought standing out in the open was the perfect disguise. It was the wind, you didn't take that into account." "Right, damn it. I'll get better next time. The two laughed a little as the bit ended. Ready to go? Just need to get my bag. Suddenly, his bag dropped and his arms off screen. From class. Thanks, Ayumi. He tried to sneak a look over to her to figure out if he had missed it on her. Clearly he was more blind than he realized. Or her secret turned out to be a magician, theory number 13. Why, you're welcome. I'm surprised you forgot your books. I was taking the trash out, so I planned to return. Good to go then? Would seem that way. What place you got picked out today? You know I'm gonna run out of new places to show you eventually, Yuki. Not today, though. He grinned with excitement. Hiroshi stopped midpoint and tilted his wrist a little, admitting defeat. I guess that's true. This is one that Kazuhiro and Tatsuya discovered with me back in our crazy junior high days. Quickly, he reverted to a casual walk towards the school gates. Dropped with such an interesting backstory detail, Yuki hurried along to keep pace with him. Or will I get to hear about the wistful days of youth? Mistakes of good intentions and bad deeds. Tales of friendship and blood. I think you're overhyping someone so average. You can save the dramatic tales for your books. You're anything but average, Hiroshi. Coming from someone like yourself, I'm not sure where that puts me. A small smirk drew over his face as Yuki tried to peek a read of his expression. Just a disappointed pout in return for not finding a clue to if Hiroshi spoke the truth or not. Perhaps I'll share something with you after we've been friends longer. I can't wait. Hiroshi thought, between the rumors, those that went to his junior high, and what I see next to me, I really don't know what to make of someone like him. If even a couple of the stories told about him are accurate, he's far more crazy than anything I've done. Staying close seems the smartest thing for now. Warm evening light painted orange highlights across the city. Low hums of traffic kept the view from being too perfect as the adults started leaving daily jobs. A different routine filled the city, no longer dominated by the youth. Exchanging waves, Yuki and Ayumi saw off their friends. He watched the three boys make it to the intersection, before Ayumi's voice cut through even haze of the city noise. You're rather impressive. Keeping up that mask of yours the whole time. The smile he always held dropped as Yuki turned to face Ayumi. Cold dark eyes with a heavy shadow painted across his face stared at the girl that became a stranger. Immediately, his gaze dug into her features and expression, trying to pick out what was real and where the lies began. Memories contradicted reality, which was right. Who was Ayumi? Not nearly as impressive as a childhood friend hiding that they're a killer from everyone. A soldier. As much as I can appreciate the distinction, that's not really the matter at hand right now. Fair enough. You want answers. I've had so long to think about what she would say, I don't really know what to expect or to believe. All I know is that something that should be completely impossible happened, and this is all feeling like a dream. Speaking plainly, you're a key figure in a political battle that will decide the future of my people. That's the elevator pitch. Give me the back of the book summary. Huh! I was attacked by a man that could defy the laws of reality and physics. He, like myself and you, are part of a group of people who can rewrite the laws of the world to create anything that our imaginations can come up with. Chapter 3. A Fantasy of Reality. Stunned. Shocked. Flabbergasted. Searching for larger words did nothing to improve the mental state of Yuki. Even processing what he heard left him rewinding to confirm his own sanity, and hers. Which, staring at Ayumi's face, didn't even bat an eye. Given that she lied completely unflinchingly to him about other things, could he really trust her face? He just needed a better explanation. What? If you're looking to pitch a manga concept, I can point you to some offices. An unamused scowl redrew Ayumi's face. She crossed her arms and stared back at him. I'm being serious. Think about what you're saying. I could probably easily find half a dozen manga with a similar setup. If you're going to just lie, Try to be a little more grounded. Are you denying what you said earlier? I was expecting something that actually makes sense. We don't live in a fantasy, as much as the two of you seem to think I believe we do. This is the real world, save the tall tales for someone more gullible. A dragged-out sigh escaped her lips. This is more troublesome. For someone with their head in the clouds all the time, you're being very close-minded. Sorry for not believing superpowers exist. What's the real story here? Flying machines and 3D projectors? You would believe science can explain what you saw? Smoke and mirrors is a classic. Technology is the more rational explanation. Ayumi struggled to hold back the amount of frustration and disgust surfacing. Smoke. And mirrors. Checking the corners and street, people walked everywhere. It was getting to evening as she reminded herself. She weighed the responses against the mission objective. Nothing would proceed, especially not the goal, if he remained unconvinced. Committing to the course, she grabbed his wrist. If you need proof to properly listen to me. She marched firmly between the restaurant they just left and the next-door bookstore. A darkened alley gave her the secrecy she needed. Would it be any different if he still didn't see me as a childhood friend? He had a pretty clear sense of what she planned to do. Any effort he made to try to pull his arm free of her hold failed. Ayumi's fingers had turned into a lock completely incapable of being broken or squeezed through. I just wish she would make sense. As wonderful as something completely fictional as having superpowers would be cool, that's not how the world works. So I don't know why she's going about this Chiuni dream. I never knew she was like this. This isn't the place for a full explanation, but this should hopefully convince you what is reality. She released his hand and turned to face him with only a meter between them. Crossing his arms, he continued to have skepticism painted over his face. Show me your magic show. A slight twitch hit her eyebrow as she fought to keep her composure with him. Just don't move. At her feet the ground distorted into a series of ripples. Expanding outward for only a few meters, not even reaching the backs of the buildings, the asphalt surface returned to its rigid state. Jump! Huh! Jump! Just humor me. Yuki shrugged, confused by her request. However, there was no harm in it. Strange as the act seemed, it left him a little curious. Bending his knees a little to commit to something that bordered a serious attempt, he leapt. Nothing strange about the jump, at least in his mind. Now what? You haven't noticed? You're not touching the ground. Immediately looking down, he saw the ground beneath him, but a good quarter of a meter distance separated his feet and asphalt. Across from him, he could see Ayumi no longer meet his eyes straight. She had to look up a little. Kneeling down, he touched the air where his feet stood, but his hands went straight through the air as it should. Defying any concept he had on how it worked, he tapped his foot meeting resistance as if it were ground. A wrinkle carved through his brow trying to understand what happened. Under any number of stories he read, this made sense. Reality? He struggled to find a reasonable answer. I can almost feel the smugness from her. I don't know how this is possible. But I also didn't know how that sand guy did what he did. I just expected an answer that fit with the laws of reality. Pensive stares at his feet only delayed his return to Ayumi. Closing his eyes, he returned to stand facing towards his friend, maybe friend, person of unknown origin. He delayed. No doubt she knew it too. Still he did it regardless. Seconds into minutes. It became awkward in silence. A creeping itch at the back of his neck just taunting him to turn as if in a horror movie. The jump scare waited for him. Nothing would happen until he gave into the inevitable. Resist however he might, the truth remained. Or the lack of a truth he could find. Exhaling suddenly broke the awkwardness. Fine. I don't know how you're doing it. Despite that he still is refusing to accept what I'm telling him. It didn't take someone of her training to read that. He made no efforts to hide his continual denial. The stubbornness he displayed began to surprise her more than frustrate. This sort of reaction never came up in any of her forecasts. I guess there's still more I don't know about him. With no ceremony, the force that kept Yuki in the air disappeared. While he recovered from the surprise, she considered the next plan. Then she remembered something. Where do you think that sakura petal came from that Saki found in your hair? Sakura? Yuki had to think for a moment. It then flashed through his mind the moment from the morning. Both an out-of-season blossom, and one that should have been impossible to find in his neighborhood. You're saying that's the same thing? It was a small hint of your power surfacing. Uncontrolled manifestations are common signs in those that have started to have it awaken. The subconscious has a strong influence on our power, which is why it must be controlled or it will become a threat to everyone around you. Resting in bed, deep in thought, the distant playful sounds of Ken barely even reached his ears. All of his thoughts concentrated inward towards the echoing words. Ever since spoken they echoed within his heart, a plucked string that never ceased. Still rejecting Ayumi's claims, he returned home. Despite that, he found himself with a heavy oppressive weight surrounding him. A twisting and aching burning filled his stomach that made him lie down. Nothing improved the feeling. She's just getting in my head, repeated words. Each time did nothing to improve his growing discomfort. It only bothered him that it even troubled him to start. A completely fictional tale with him at the center, he'd have to be completely disillusioned to believe it. Why did he even give it a second thought? What about it made him hesitate? Spinning like a top, it cycled around in his mind repeatedly. A turn asked the question only for the next turn to repeat it. Stuck in a loop, he laid in his bed inescapable and mute. An end would never be reached from where he sat. That much he knew even as such things were rhetorical. More impressive, it forestalled his desire to read. It didn't even come to him as a thought. Stray thoughts couldn't escape the tumultuous waves which crashed around the bulwark of his mind. Any attempt would need the titanic will to weave the labyrinthine chambers that connected between where he mentally lived and the external world beyond. Nothing could achieve such a feat. Everything suddenly popped like a soap bubble. Reality whipped harshly back as Yuki gasped with surprise. For a split second, he didn't even know where he was. The light in his room blinded him. An all too familiar bouncing in his bed eventually told him everything that he needed to know. Right, 10-year-olds existed. Ken stood on his bed frozen in position with Yuki staring up at his little brother. The expression he carried changed quickly from something closer to an animal caught in the act to one of happiness and excitement at a job well done. Even if that job did mean the rough waking of Yuki. Off to the side, safely and firmly rooted to the floor, June made his own personal effort to wake him up by shaking the mattress. I'm guessing Momo sent you? Yupper. She wanted help with dinner, but wouldn't let us. Yuki looked over to June, seeing him silently nodding in agreement with Ken's conveyance of the situation. Yeah, probably for the best. He pulled himself up and lifted Ken up to let him back down to the floor. She knows you only want to help, but you'll have to wait until you're a little older. But I can reach the counter now, he declared, bouncing up and stretching out his arms to demonstrate his reach. Getting out of bed, Yuki patted the two on the head. And Momo's very proud that you can. But you don't want to make your sister angry by not listening to her, right? Both nodded quietly, understanding the weight of the words. Don't worry, after we eat we can play. So be good until then. Okay. Run along. Watching the two scurry off to their room politely gave him a bit of relief. Back to reality, he stared at the stairs down into the living room and pondered for a moment his sister at the end. The length to reach her seemed to stretch out as he thought about Ayumi's words. Shaking his head, he tried to carve out that part of his worry and compartmentalize that away locked in the vault of his mental bank. Slapping his cheeks, he jump-started everything to paint over his face the smile everyone knew from him. Right. Back to reality. The long stairs snapped back to their true length. Etched in with warm light, it provided some calm to him. Yuki walked down into the living room and turned the corner towards the kitchen. With an L-shaped couch acting as the divider in the room, he approached the back third of the main room of the ground floor. A more open layout, the kitchen separated itself with ceramic tile and an island with stools on the far side away from the stove. Off in the corner, the dining table stood mostly empty with a few notebooks and papers left by their younger siblings. Sizzling and warm aromas of spices filled the air as he stepped into the territory of Momoko. Looking around at the current state, fish cooked on the stove top while a small array of greens laid out on the island still uncut. Momoko actively worked something in the deep pot slow cooking, likely for lunches tomorrow. Stepping in around her, he immediately went to work chopping up the green onion. I sent them off to their room to play. Thanks, they were getting rowdy. Pausing on the cutting, he turned back over to the stove and grabbed the cooking chopsticks, pushing around and turning the fish. Stretching out his hand, Momoko handed over a small prep dish that he poured in, shifting around the cooking food. All things considered, I think that's better than the alternative. She stepped away from the pot and took over the chopping as they continued their cooking dance. Yeah, they bounce back quickly. Though I worry if that's a good or bad thing. Not really sure we're qualified for that. But we just have to do the best we can. That was our promise. A heavy sigh that carried an unspoken amount of weight came from Momoko. She continued to chop in silence as they worked together to finish the meal. Outside, a kilometer away, two shadowy figures stood from the edge of the cliffside road down over the residential neighborhood below. The taller of the two spoke with a deep, rich, effortless timbre. The first attempt failed. Though you were expecting as much. The short and softer spoken, but with a voice from deep within, figure answered. Yes, the plan remains unchanged. You better have more success. Time is not with us. As you command. For our future. Chapter 4. Blood Tinge. A new morning, but not the same morning anymore. A repeat would be welcome, preferred over what became of morning now. Fresh and new turned sour like rotting eggs. It needed to be scrapped and pushed away into a far-away corner. Left out of sight preferably, disposed of or even incinerated. Anything that would excise the hint of the stain. Turmoil, tumultuous. Yuki stood planted firmly in the street. A heavily drawn shadow cast over his face toned his smiling visage with dire highlights. Yet only those with the purview of his thoughts would find such superfluous details to be more than a break of the norm. While he waited, he kept adjusting his uniform. A palette of pale blues and whites painted the plaid print pants. A curiously bold choice for uniform, but grounded by the more conservative black blazer. Matching blue stitches and lines penciled in the highlights of the blazer with the shared plaid print found on the exposed part of the collar breaking the solid painted black of the jacket. On the right breast pocket, the school logo, an embroidered triangle with mirrored shooting stars accompanied by a Japanese maple tree beneath. Around the corner, he glimpsed his best friend, Saki, and the stranger, Ayumi. The two conversed as though long-time close friends, sharing everything freely. Should I tell her? Telling her would mean that I believe Ayumi's tale. I don't even have any proof. I'd look like an idiot. Silence, for now at least, he required further time to consider. If only it made sense. Saki stopped as she came up to Yuki. Why are you waiting for us? Something wrong? What? I wait for you too. No, you walk with your head in the clouds until we catch up. Only sometimes. She stared at him, waiting for him to correct his understatement. Okay, most times I do. Hey, a good book is hard to ignore. And when you wait for us, you want something or you're pissed about something you read. It's not always books. Fine, yes, it's always books. Column B? He nodded in agreement, lacking the determination for anything else. Column B. It was a terrible story. I couldn't suspend my disbelief experiencing it. I didn't really get much sleep. You do know that not every book you find is going to be good. No need to lose sleep over it. The duality of their conversation made it hard to commit fully to her stance. All the while, he kept a corner eye out to see what Ayumi did. She remained disengaged, likely waiting to see what he did. Knowing that he kept the company of a killer gave him pause to any sort of action in front of her, regardless of her previous declarations. Even disbelieving the story, he did witness someone's death, which should have left him with a heavier burden if she had not dumped a metric ton of random refuse upon him. As the conversation stalled out, Ayumi leaned in. We probably should start heading to school. Accepting nods agreed to carry the conversation? Debate? Disagreement? One or all of the above things would be continued as they walked. Walking through the hallway, Yuki continued to try to rationalize the finer points of daydreaming as a mental release of stresses that maintained his personal health. After a long walk to school, only nodding compliance came out of Saki by this point. He stopped himself mid-sentence to step aside a classmate. Morning, Yumi! Roughly similar in height with a shorter close haircut, a few long strains drawn back behind her ear, Yumi had a smaller frame compared to Saki, though against an athlete was probably unfair to Yumi. Quiet with a traditional, yet slight modern vibe, she politely stepped out of his way as well, with her two friends staring intently at Yuki's overt friendliness. Good morning, Hayashi. Her gaze darted towards him for a second and then down and to the right. Watching the stares from her friends, Kid and Katsumi, he kept moving undeterred from his destination. Though as he went to look back to resume with Saki, his friend had a look for him as well, though different than the previous he just received. What? I'm just being friendly. Not everyone's so easygoing with your openness like Hiroshi, especially with your history. Which, being history, is in the past. So let's just focus on the now. Yuki, I really wish you'd have a little more common sense. I don't know, it seems pretty common to be friendly. Kid moved to physically place herself between Yumi and Yuki. Don't worry about him, Yumi. It's better if you stay away. Bright-eyed with a bob cut that curved into shape around her face, Kid held a stern expression to deflect anything from Yuki that might get through. All of the rumors from his past school. Cut and Katsumi. Something about him doesn't add up, like he's a fake. I wouldn't trust his kindness. She was tilting a little between her friends and a little towards the half-obscured Yuki. Darting her eyes around, she was searching for her words. But he helped me. Her voice was trailing off into silence as the rest of her words turned into vapor. Even if he did, we don't know what he's thinking. You know how people can be. Yumi froze up with bits of memory blinking in her mind. A soft, slow nod came from her in agreement. She knew that they weren't wrong. Yet she looked around them, still wondering if he was in the hall. She was too late. She was quiet. Silence turned to weights tying her down. Left unable to walk, she gave into her course. It was right. They were right. This was safe. Safe was best. Safe wasn't what guided Yuki at the moment. He ignored his surroundings and transitioned into retelling Saki about a scene from a recent book he finished. Painting a vivid image with his hands and arms, his voice definitely began to fight for control of the general ambient noise in the classroom. A few classmates began to grow quiet as his dramatic recounting continued. Yuki only made it about 2 minutes further into the presentation before the class rep and teacher broke things up to restore order. A stern, familiar reprimand later, and he walked back to his desk with a few low chuckles. Not that affected Yuki in any manner. School continued out normally without attacks from assassins, which was how things should be. It'd be pretty strange for that to be the norm. So normal was the everyday. No reason to think it should be anything else. Yet something felt off. He never let on during class or the walk back with Saki and Ayumi. Waving off the two, he watched from the gate as they continued on up the road. Ayumi shattered his peace, and upon reflection, he never knew what she did after leaving him. What sort of life did she have? How much of what he thought he knew about could be real? Was any of it real? Where did the lies end? It mattered little how real her story was. The facts were that the girl in his memory and the one that killed a man didn't match up. Any way he tried to paint the story in his mind, it didn't fit into neat pieces. Every possible answer simply sounded like a book from his shelf. What was reality? Ayumi's reality? His? Turning away finally, Yuki opened the gate. Another night awaited him as he attempted to ignore the problem Ayumi. He didn't even get the door open before June pushed it. "I'm home, June!" Yuki gave a little pat on his little brother's head. In silence, June lit up with a warm glow in his eyes as he hopped back inside. Yuki followed him and soon greeted by Ken as well. They tugged together on his arms, dragging him away even while attempting to take off his shoes. He managed to maintain his manners in time, even if his shoes laid half-turned on their side. He couldn't help smiling at their energy. Ken handed out a couple of the toy planes that they were playing with before. Yuki sat down with June flying around the fighter plane given to him. It only took a few seconds, it seemed, before Ken rushed back in with two more toys, a truck and a car, running them over the wood floor. They played for a few minutes before a shout from the storage room wound around. "Yuki!" Momoko called, but it felt different. She had urgency and panic in her voice. He dropped the plane and stood up. An uneasy churning sickness crept into his stomach. His mind played terrible scenarios that doubled his heart rate. Before he even managed to take a step, everything suddenly changed to crimson. At first it looked like someone took dozens of paint buckets and emptied them over everything. The floor, walls, ceiling, couch, even the toy plane he just held turned a dark, unnecessary red hue. This impossible change, where the surfaces literally seemed to birth an endless font of crimson ice, flashed in disturbingly familiar memory. "That sand guy. What's this red water?" exclaimed Ken, clapping his hands against the surface. It strangely didn't stick to his hands when he played with it. Any splashing just dripped off him like the world's best liquid-resistant material. And yet that didn't seem to be the end of it. Just as Yuki started to adjust to the strange warping of reality, reality got more bizarre. Out of the walls, floor, and even the couch came illustrations of nightmares and horror. He had seen similar imagery in his manga, but that didn't prepare him for something that had real form and sound, presenting a vivid painting of grotesque life. Half-formed humanoid frames of bones, muscle, and sinew transitioned through any surface in his sight. Some had legs and a head, others arms and a chest, others were a Frankenstein mix, as if anatomy meant nothing. A mass of vaguely human limbs reached towards anything not like itself. Immediately, Yuki knelt down and put his arms around June and Ken, only to find half muscle-covered arms reaching out for them. With an unusual amount of agility, Yuki picked up both and leapt on the table and then couch. A quick skip and skip landed him up against the wall facing outside of their house. What little remained recognizable as a house steady distorted into a pulsing mess of flesh all covered in thick blood. Sweat beading up in droplets on his temple. Flashes of yesterday threatened to cuff him to the ground. Panic and fear didn't win though, as his instincts to protect remained. "I've got to get them out of here. Somewhere safe," and Momo. Tilting his head back towards the window, he remembered that the sand eventually stopped. But this already presented a completely different situation than before. "Come on, where's the end?" Scanning quickly, he pulled up his brothers closer. The property wall made it impossible for him to see outside, but crimson painted everything in sight. The few seconds he spent near the wall finally caught up to him. Creepy baby and giant feet reached out to pin him down. "Damn it! Sorry, Dad, but I've got to do what's important." Yuki pulled free from the grab and sprinted to the end table. Spinning around swiftly, he kicked the lamp off the table and at the window. Shattered immediately, he bounded for the opening, pushing through the limbs coming up to hold him down. Unlike the traction he expected, the blood didn't slip and he came to a quick and painful stop, smacking his back against the wall, in an attempt to keep June and Ken out of harm. Sure, T. He caught the confused stares of the two as they went through a whiplash of emotions, but empathetically figuring out the seriousness. Are you two okay? Big bro, what's going on? I don't know, but I promise you that I'll do anything to keep you safe. I wouldn't start making promises, echoed a slick, deep male voice. Yuki! Ken? Snapped back to his brother, he saw both disappeared. Yuki craned his head back to Ken's voice, seeing two limbs holding his little brother moving through the property wall away from his reach. He reactively took a step to save Ken, but looked the opposite direction to see June silently dragged away similarly. June! Yuki ground his teeth at the choice as seconds wasted his efforts. Bastard, come for me! In time, but the distractions must be removed. Staring into the darkness of his home, the unknown challenged him with the impossible choice. Indecision froze him. Where are you, Momo? I need help. I don't know how to get out of this situation. Chapter 5. The Cracked Seal. A dusk sun burnt the edges of the blood-coated environs. Painted in broad, crude strokes, it had an otherworldly elegance. A juxtaposition of horror and beauty inscribed upon a pulsing canvas. Disturbing mounds of barely recognizable human forms crawled in waves, each pulling away that which was important. Ken and June returned struggling and flailing to the house. Whoever wanted him this time didn't have the same approach. Yuki ground his teeth and clenched his fists. The wordless fear that clouded his mind for the last day finally materialized. An aching and gnawing uncertainty which never left him no matter his efforts to paint it over with his customary wit and flourish. Taunted by the unknown voice, Yuki made the only choice left to him. He jumped back inside through the broken window. Crouched upon the window frame, Yuki panned around the haunting living room. Mounted to opposite walls, Ken and June couldn't move, with a large fleshy rib cage hanging them by their torsos with a multitude of hands strapping down their wrists outstretched. Big bro, I'm scared. I know. This'll all be over soon. I believe I said to not make promises. Snapping his head towards the voice, he still couldn't find them. Their voice felt so near, as if they stood next to him. Show yourself if you're so interested in me. Yes, this little game has concluded itself. Nowhere in sight did they appear. Yuki remained on guard by the odd statement. He felt like the man could come from anywhere. The voice lied about his location. Searching around for any hint of a stranger still didn't reveal anyone. No sounds of footsteps betrayed them. An unnerving still held sway over the very air, as if the man controlled not just the walls of his house, but the air he breathed. What sort of trickery did he employ? Without another moment to question the defiance of Yuki's reality, a shadowed form finally appeared. He tried to get a glimpse of this invader, but it seemed like light itself couldn't touch him. An eerie, depthless shape of a male appeared. Immediately, something else caught his eye when the man dragged something else with him. Flinging his unwanted company at Yuki's feet, a shocked gasp escaped Yuki's lips. Momo! Big sis! She proved to be more trouble than her appearance told. Cuts tore through her clothes. Blood dripped from swallow wounds along her arms and shoulders. Each looked defensive, protecting her vitals. Yuki pulled her up towards him to check on her breathing. A strong force of life still ran through her. But it didn't help that he had never seen her in such a state before. The strongest of the family and anchor, he held her tight. Damn it, this is all. Yuki, are you safe? Yeah, don't worry about me. You're the one bleeding everything. Good. It's not good. I need you. This is between us. I'll accept no further interruptions. Upon that declaration, the floor of blood under them birthed another mass of skeletal limbs. They grabbed at Yuki's arms, pinning him down even as he struggled. While restrained, the floor opened up like a mouth filled with fingers and arms rather than teeth or fangs swallowing up Momoko's body. Yuki pulled tighter at the hands that kept him down. Stop it! Give her back! The woman's a distraction. She's not the reason I'm here. She disappeared from sight only to surface on the wall nearby June on Yuki's right. Caged within a mass of bone and muscle, her arms and legs were pinned against the wall. At least she seemed safe. For now. How am I supposed to deal with someone that can make flesh puppets to do whatever he wants? I hate to admit it, but maybe Yumi's not lying about all of this. But how, why? There's so many questions to all of this. I really could use her help right now. He half expected her to just show up mysteriously like the last time. Yet that still hadn't happened. It was up to him. A normal human. Suddenly, the solid black that painted the man disappeared. For the first time, Yuki could see the face of his invader. Like the man before, they were a foreigner with American features, or maybe European. He honestly didn't know how to tell the difference. The only foreigner he knew was Saki's mother. And this guy had something about him that seemed a little different than her American mother. Tall in stature, nearly a full 2 meters it felt, he towered over Yuki. Dressed in a white robe-like outfit, it hung loose over the shoulders with it crossed over and pinned up by a basic belt. Where the draping cloth ended, a loose pair of pants continued. From his bare arms and what the robe didn't cover of his chest, the man was fit and well trained. Every sign and feeling he got from the man told him that he didn't belong standing against him. He defeated Momo with ease. The sand attacker proved more than he could handle. This new foreigner seemed even worse. What chance do I have? His arms suddenly came free. The stranger placed him in a very different situation than the last. This man clearly wanted a fight unlike the other. Which gave Yuki an idea. Are you with that other guy? Because that wasn't me. It was someone else that killed him. What happened to them is of no consequence. It kinda is to me. He tried to kill me and I'm getting that same vibe off you. And I don't even know why. It's all feeling like some really messed up prank. I've got no interest in whatever is going on here. You don't have a choice in the matter. It's my life. I always have a choice. Your fate was determined at birth, and that's you've been marked for death. That's not how things work. And would you stop being ominously cryptic like you're in the first act of a movie? Just tell me what's going on. I've already said plenty. You won't get answers from me, only a warrior's death. Yeah, I guess that would be too easy. But I'm not a warrior, I read books. The foreigner took a step forward with the passivity finally dropping. Everyone's got one in them. It just needs to be pulled out. The man delivered the words with lethal intent. Purpose drove him with unrelenting conviction. A menacing aura bled off him. Yuki glanced side to side, picking up the meaning quickly. Don't! This is between us. I have no interest in an empty fight. What the hell's wrong with you? This isn't a fight, it's murder! Enough talk. Show me what you can do. Pressure surrounded him like at the bottom of the ocean. The very air seemed to breathe down on him, heating up his body, making him sweat. Every part of him refused to move. Flashes of the attack trapped him. Yet the overwhelming towering presence of the man before him cowed his body. Nothing would move. Sudden screams erupted from around him. He jerked to his left, hearing Ken's cries. The bones holding him up had tightened up, squeezing against his tiny body. Dull, shallow cries came from the right. Out of June panicked as the pressure wrapped tighter. The weights that bound him snapped, finally freed from the mental bondage, and Yuki staggered a few steps forward. Stop it! Don't involve children in this! Then fight me! He tightened the hold of his hostages further to drag out the fight he desired. Bastard! Yuki charged straight at the man, throwing his fist wildly at his gut to stop the foreigner. However, it did little to nothing to the man. All it seemed to do was disappoint the tall stranger. Grabbing Yuki by his school uniform jacket, he lifted him off the ground. Your sister put up more of an effort. He cast Yuki back, throwing him towards the coffee table. Even covered in blood, It stabbed dully into his shoulder as he crashed into and broke it to pieces. Yuki coughed in pain, pushing himself back against the couch. His body ached. He couldn't tell if it was bleeding. All that he could think about was their suffering because of him. I need to do something. I can't let him hurt them. Pushing off the couch, Yuki stood again, clutching his shoulder from the pain. The man wanted a fight, but he didn't know how he could give him what he wanted. If any bit of what Ayumi said was true, there was nothing that he had to compete with such things. It was an impossible situation. A strained groan came out of Momoko as the threat carried over. All three twitched in pain. Momoko fought through it and tried to break free. The bindings gave her no leverage to use her strength. Yuki! Yuki! Momo? I'll get you out of there. I'll figure out something. Yuki, listen to me. You need to stop blaming yourself for it. You know he's right. You're stronger than this. It's fine to fight for those you love. So don't be afraid of your past, Yuki. Washes of emotions poured over him. Flashes of a bed with a blurry face creeped into the edges of his mind. Unfamiliar voices complaining about him echoed. Everything jumbled together into a chaotic stew. Confusion poured into him with only one certainty. No, it's my fault, I can't. If you don't, he's going to kill all of us. Remember who you are. Momo. Punctuating her plea to him came an arc of blood as a series of bony fingers pierced through her upper arms. Yuki's eyes widened in horror at his sister's suffering. Echoes of screams tortured his mind with his vision narrowing. Wicked imagery painted through his mind. Damn it! Stop it, you bastard! Taunted with lost memories and the present pain, Yuki screamed internally until it released from his lips. The vault within him that held everything back began to show signs of cracks. He couldn't deny Momoko. He had to do something, even if it was the stained hands that he used. Yuki lowered his hand off his bruised shoulder. Pushing the pain away, he focused only on the one that had to matter to him. I'm sorry. Springing forward, his body surged with old memories. The motion of the body and tension of the muscles recalled with familiarity. The foreigner no longer stood still with an unguarded stance. His desired fight finally arrived. A small smirk came over him as he saw something. Charging forward, ripples broke through the blood on the floor. For only a moment, as Yuki's foot made contact, the blood disappeared, replaced with grass. It's finally happening. His power is surfacing. Chapter 6. Subconscious. AD. Puddles of grass battled a sea of blood as Yuki charged. Each step echoed through, momentarily cleansing, yet altering as well. Brief for only a blink and gone, no permanent change found purchase. All the foreigner needed was such a sign to finally commit. An easily telegraphed punch stopped with little effort. But the man raised an eyebrow and pushed back against Yuki with his open hand. Though Yuki slid away in an unnatural way, as though something pulled him rather than force from the hand and merely acted as cover. I felt that punch, kid. Seems you've finally got your heart in this. This isn't a game. Yuki ground his teeth at his second attempt. He had to do more to be able to save everyone. Quite right. I'm glad you understand the situation. Shut up! Pushing his foot against the floor, he jumped back. I need more, remember, more, he had to let his body think. Close the way, it hadn't been long enough to forget. Leaping back into the fight, Yuki tried to think less about each strike and let the feeling flow through his arms. Each swing improved in form and strength, still lacking what he needed. Deflected and turned away, nothing broke through the man's defenses. He hardly seemed to try with Yuki. Judging from appearance, he had training in a far greater capacity than Yuki. A clear disadvantage, not even counting the added wrinkle of a reality warping power, which remained unused in the fight from all that Yuki could glean. Not that he even understood it. It could be doing everything for all he knew. You're going to need more than your physical body. Fight me with everything! What? Yuki leapt back, his body's instincts noticing it before himself, but he wasn't fast enough. A quick counter blow to his gut kicked him back. Coughing as he dropped to one knee, it would have been worse. This isn't like what I'm used to, but who's ever fought in an actual Hell's Cape? Echoes of his siblings' pain pushed him back to the fight. He dove in with greater intensity, as if that were the only thing the man wanted from him. And yet, in spite of it all, he hardly seemed engaged in the fight. Frustration built up in Yuki at a man that would use his own family just to get satisfaction. How did such depravity get fostered? A grin suddenly appeared on the foreigner out of nowhere. Yuki drew in a heavy breath, pausing to understand what pleased him so after their latest exchange. Finally, you're making things interesting. What the hell are you going on about? You should pay attention to your surroundings. Surroundings? What are you? Caught up in his own thoughts, his mind hadn't been focused on the fight, just going through the motions. He looked around, not finding anything out of place. Blood and flesh stretched out everywhere that he looked. Looking up at the ceiling, he saw June and Momo. Nearby him, in front of him, Ken laid on the floor. Ceiling? Floor? Finally, everything sped up to his mind as the whole room rotated 90 degrees. Fixing his perspective of the living room, he knelt on the wall. Somehow, down at his feet he could see a small circle of grass where he stood rather than blood, but the two battled in what almost looked like a glitch in a game where the two clashed. Blades of grass floated or stopped abruptly, becoming blood in a shaking line. I don't underdash. Before he could finish, the wall ceased to hold him. Ugh, thankfully it wasn't a far drop, but... He thought back to the moment before, to what he saw. Grass grew on the wall, about as strange as blood. Visually it had more appeal. It reminded him a little of the park down the street. Stopping the old memories, he stood up, needing to focus on the threat over nostalgia. Don't know what that was, but he seemed excited about it. It'd be nice to use that again. I'd be able to get a little more creative. Unfortunately, he didn't know how it happened or if it was even him doing it. As little sense as it would have made, it could have even been the foreigner with how eager he acted. Yuki, however, just focused on what he could do. Such an answer turned out about as he expected, though. His punches batted away and him being tossed. Yet Yuki once more found himself stuck to anything but the floor, this time the ceiling. But upon noticing it, he dropped again, though falling on the couch at least. Damn it! It gave him a little more certainty. He jumped forward to the chair and then into the air against the man. As Yuki expected, a counter sent him back, but he landed on the ceiling. Jumping forward, he ran over the ceiling. It's working! That moment, his feet lost their hold, and he fell. However, he grabbed onto some limb and swung himself toward the man with a flying kick. Bracing the kick with his arm, the foreigner staggered a moment before grabbing Yuki. A quick swing threw Yuki's body against the wall, knocking the wind out of him. Is this all you've got? Make it more interesting before I end this. Yuki coughed and drew in a long breath, feeling the stinging pain all over his body. Apart from the bullying, which never went this far, it had been a while since he tasted such pain. This is getting me nowhere. But what can I do? Pushing himself back up to his feet, he felt a little comforted that his guy wanted a fight. If only I could take advantage of his cockiness. Confusion suffused with desperation, Yuki charged in, feeling the ticking clock on his family. Feinting with a strike, he slid past the man and under his counter. A quick sweep of his legs to the back of the man's knee gave a moment of stagger for Yuki to capitalize on. He leapt up, landing on the ceiling, and grabbed on the upper arms, using the gravity that kept him attached to slam the man on his back. The moment he released the man, he fell once more back to the floor. Yuki dropped down with his foot to hopefully stun or knock the man out. However, a limb came up, a bony hand grabbed his ankle and threw him away towards the kitchen. Yuki caught himself on the island, only feeling a little sting. There was something different in that last moment. Seeing the man stand up gave him all the confirmation. He no longer had the defensive stance and actually started to walk towards him. Seems like he's got what he wanted. Now he wants to kill me, Momo guys. Don't slow down on me, kid. The foreigner clutched his hand as the blood on the island jumped out in all directions as hardened spikes. Sprays of blood arced through the air as Yuki dropped to the floor. Despite how it looked, he somehow managed to come out of it with only wounds on his arms and back. Not going to question luck now. However, Yuki didn't get much time to think as he saw more spikes and jumped away. Continuing to back away, Yuki caught himself in the corner looking for an option. But more spikes jumped out at him. Nothing happened. No blood, no pain. Confused, he looked down to see that just like with the grass before, the spikes stopped near to where the grass appeared. The small circle around him seemed to have grown in size. I think I'm understanding some of this. Impressive, kid! You're making this more interesting by the minute. Making me have to put in effort now. Suddenly the spikes that were cut off materialized as the grass around Yuki's feet shrank to a smaller circle. Yuki jumped into the air, latching onto the wall to escape the spikes. He got stronger? Yuki looked over at the foreigner, trying to put together the new information. More spikes jumped out at him. Some cut through and others didn't make it. Pain filled his body again as the tension started to rise once more. The pressure poured off the foreigner as a murderous intent built. His game ended now. He marched forward and the circle around Yuki's feet tightened up even further. The spikes dug deeper into his flesh. Yuki dropped down, losing his focus. Unguarded, the man grabbed his arm and flipped him into spikes. Blood sprayed up once more as pain ran through his body. Yuki! No! Big bro! Stop hurting him! His family's screams faded from his ears as the pain overrode everything. A dull mix of noises stirred around in his ears. Yuki groaned, no longer sure how badly his body bled out. A shadow cast over him with the foreigner standing before him. Pulled up by his arm, Yuki hung loosely with his eye half closed in pain. His body suddenly bounced with more dull pain echoing through him. Yuki coughed up blood, struggling to keep his focus. Am I going to die this time? Cast off, Yuki's body flew through the living room and smashed against the window frame. Dropped to the floor, his arm caught on the window frame as he half leaned against the wall. Panting heavily, all he could hear was his heart beating out of his chest. As everything faded more, his mind went to this family. What will happen to them? Disturbing imagery ran through his mind, constructed from what already happened. It snapped him back to reality. Yuki coughed suddenly, feeling the acute pain clearly. Yuki! Run! Don't worry about us. Momo. Pulling himself up by the window ledge, he fought with his eyes to focus. I can't abandon you. Still got a little fight, you kid. I was worried you'd disappoint being a soft boy in this safe, peaceful land. I don't know what's going on here, but we're not going to let you do whatever you want. Yuki felt his lungs burning. His chest barely contained his pounding heart. He was pretty sure only adrenaline kept him standing. Survival instinct and guts remained his last options. He prayed it would be enough. Finding his strength once more, he charged back around the couch for the man. Skating around, he evaded spikes and limbs. Yuki stopped around behind his opponent. Grabbing a chair, he flung it through the air. Blood spikes jumped up from the floor and ceiling, catching the chair. Yuki leapt away as the chair slowly broke into wood shards. Bouncing off the floor and wall, he flung more objects as he jumped around. Yuki landed on the bone chest that held Momoko in place. He paused, breathing heavily, and dropped to the floor. Rolling over, he kicked the end table over at the foreigner. Yuki leapt into the air, following after it. Kicking off the wall, he punched through the blood spike, connecting with the jaw of the man finally. The follow-through landed him back on the opposite side once more. The blood spikes around him thickened and destroyed all of the thrown objects. He turned to face Yuki, rubbing his jaw as it turned purplish red under the skin. That actually did some damage, kid. I'm starting to like you. Gathering up blood around him, it forged itself into a flamberge. He started to march towards Yuki. Yuki stood up, preparing to charge straight into the danger. It's time! He sprinted forward, smashing through the blood spikes as they came up. From behind the man, Momoko slid in, kicking the back of his knees and grabbing the man's waist to pull him down. The foreigner looked in shock to see her free, but noticed the place seeing Yuki charging in. Ignoring the clear signs, Yuki threw in his right arm as the flamberge swung, sacrificing it. While the sword pushed past him, he swung down his left into the ribcage down by the man's kidneys. Almost immediately, he coughed up an unusual amount of blood for a seemingly shallow hit. Yuki tumbled past both, missing half of his right arm as blood poured out. The invader remained stunned, blood pooling in his mouth and starting to cover his face with Momoko trapped underneath. The house went silent. Chapter 7. Inheritance. Silence poured over the house. No one moved, painted with a heavy oppressive stroke. Blood-covered walls slowly shrank away. The end finally arrived. Momoko snapped back to attention as the shock of everything drained away. She moved the body of the foreigner off her. His breathing remained strong, though clearly in pain. Yuki! Looking around for her brother, she jumped over all of the debris of their furniture to get to his side. Yuki! Can you hear me? Grabbing his body up into her arms, she noticed the bleeding right arm. Only the upper arm remained sliced cleanly off. Taking off her blouse, Momoko tore at the edges and wrapped it tightly around the stump. Yuki! So they struck here too? Noted a slightly out-of-breath Ayumi. Ayumi? What happened to you? You're covered in blood. Momoko trailed off as the young girl marched in, sprayed in blood from head to toe, but clearly not her own. Ayumi knelt down beside her, completely unfazed by her shocking appearance. Do you have your phone on you? We need to call an ambulance immediately. He's still breathing. She glanced over to check on the condition of the enemy. Standing up, she marched over to the unknown man and materialized a blue transparent sword. You should have killed him. Finish the job, don't leave the enemy alive. She plunged the sword straight into the skull of the man with the ease of a knife through bread. The moment after, she released the sword and it disappeared. A blue ripple expanded through the whole house as the dead body slowly began to rip apart atom by atom. She returned back to Yuki's side and pulled off the makeshift tourniquet. Before Momoko could resist, the bleeding ceased and bone grew. In moments, his arm restored and the pulse in his body stronger, Momoko looked up to the girl, confused about what she witnessed. While grateful, she wanted some answers as well. What's going on, Ayumi? That man attacked us and then. Suddenly, her eyes felt heavy. She couldn't keep herself upright. Sleep claimed her. Ayumi stood up, staring down at the two and then across at the younger children. This is going to be even more trouble than I planned for. A dull hum slowly drained out of his head. Strength built steadily back into his body. Ugh! Yuki opened his eyes and stared blankly out at the ceiling. A few moments later, he snapped up. I'm alive! He looked around a little confused. You're awake! Shouted Ken, jumping up onto the couch to sit on his brother. Taking a few more seconds, Yuki looked around, trying to piece everything together. The living room looked normal, no blood, not even a broken table. The window he remembered specifically breaking, restored. Nothing out of place. Everything was as he remembered before the attack. Was it a dream? It was no dream, Yuki, Ayumi answered, entering the room having heard his shout. You hit your head pretty hard coming down the stairs. Momo took you to the ER, while I watched over these two spiders. Ken bounced and nodded vigorously. We played lots of games with Big Sis Ayumi. I won the most. I swear your luck is like magic. Next time, I'll win. She picked up Ken and put him on the floor. He crossed his arms over his hand. I'm the game master. You'll never defeat me. Oh, is that right? I'm going to train and become the game master. She tickled him and then patted him on the back, sending him off to the kitchen. June grabbed Yuki's hand quietly, receiving an assuring nod before he followed. Let's go upstairs. Everything moved so fast, he had trouble keeping things straight. His memory of the events before he passed out remained very clear. That tall foreigner attacked him, Momo injured, blood everywhere, none of it faded from memory. Yet Ayumi told a different tale. The fear he remembered in Ken's eyes didn't even seem to be a hint. He slowly nodded while looking at her. A sense that all would be explained drew over her face. Trusting the liar for answers, it gave him pause. Yet he still followed her, as she already reached the stairs. No answers awaited in the living room. A secret. Invited into his own room felt strange, even if his mind said it hadn't been the first time for her. They navigated the spires of books on his floor. She closed the door while he went over to his bed to lay down, partly in anticipation and to rest his body. A blue ripple briefly expanded from Ayumi's feet, though nothing seemed to change as a result. We can talk now without eavesdropping. Hitting my head? A fabrication. And they believe that. They believe everything, because that's what happened. They believe a lie? What? Did you brainwash them or something? Nothing so crude and unreliable. You're acquainted with it as well. You did this to me? Yuki searched his mind frantically, trying to figure out when or how it happened. Claims of falsehoods darted quickly through shuffling thoughts. Yet if even a piece of her assertion rang true, would he even notice? His body ran cold with such ideas. At least at first, he thought harder about facts and lies. Our entire childhood? Is anything about us real? Impressive, you got there faster than I counted on. I figured you would have rejected it for longer without much proof. Why all the lies and secrets? What's going on, Ayumi? Going to listen with an open mind this time? He felt the daggers from her eyes stabbing him. Reflecting back on the afternoon and the fight, even what he saw coming from himself, denial could no longer be an option. Yuki saw his world repainted before his eyes. After everything he witnessed, his only hope now was understanding. Can you honestly blame me? Lived all my life thinking I lived in a normal world where Shounen Battle rules don't apply. It's a hard pill to swallow. I don't know what you're talking about. Regardless, this is the truth of the world. And it's just a massive secret that no one knows about. How? That's because we don't live in your modern society, outside of some exceptions. Like yourself? To a degree. To be clear, this is my first time leaving my home and I've only been here for a week. A week? But the memories, they're so vague. Like trying to hold on to sand, it all poured through his fingers. He knew it was sand and it existed, but the more he tried to hold it in his palm, the faster it ran out. All that remained in his hand was enough to know that it existed, and little more. Ayumi nodded. The memories I gave you aren't meant to be detailed. Focus too hard and the cracks will show, but the imprint is strong enough that unless someone forces you to think about it, the appearance holds. And what have you been doing with all that time? Not killing every day, I hope. Her brow pinched again as he had witnessed before. I'm not a killer. I'm a soldier. Child soldier, that's not grim. Just listen to me. Fine. Go on. As I explained before, you're the key figure in a political struggle. My home was ruled by a strong and kind king. Unfortunately, poor health has claimed him and we are in need of someone to become our new king. Watching her go into more details, Yuki could see a warmth in her face as she spoke. It cracked through the hard shell she gave him in every guarded moment. A similar expression when she wore her facade, yet unlike that when it didn't appear to lie. Publicly, the king had no heir. His wife died not long after he became king. Thus we all believed he had no offspring. His death has thrown our people into a panic. Unfortunately, though he was a good king, not all were happy with his rule. Within the court there's a divide. The loyalists, who want to maintain the work he began, and the traditionalists, who are tied to the past and tear down everything he's done. Having no heir, the traditionalists push to elect a new king by vote from the council. As is our tradition if this happens. However, after the king's death I was given a letter that a secret child did exist. While he was a good man, he wasn't blind to the corruption and made plans in secret. And I'm said cliché bastard child, huh? He pondered everything she laid out for him. Part of him still wanted to believe that she made it all up because it was the sort of trashy, yet reliably enjoyable plotline that would be a fun read for him. There's still a lot of things that need explaining, and I don't know how much more I can take. But if weird reality warping powers are real, I guess I have to give her the benefit of the doubt. Until I have reason otherwise to not believe her. Rubbing his hand against his face, he sighed. His eyes stared up at the ceiling. A normal and calm image, a little comforting against the canvas of blood and melodrama that sought him. Accepting for now what you're telling me. Your plan is to have me become your new king? Affirmative. If not, a puppet ruler will be put in place, and the corruption will spread beyond the palace. What's the timeline? Then you will come with me? Let's not go that far. I need more information first. Not to mention what you're asking of me. Of course. So long as those greedy men don't break with the traditions they claim to follow. We have 6 weeks before the crowning of the new king. 6 weeks. Flashes of his friends and family, school and his home, it squeezed his heart a little. Even with the time to think about it, he didn't know what sort of answer beyond the obvious he would reach. Perhaps only a chance to say goodbye. Goodbye. Just about time for summer vacation. Good timing, I guess. Ayumi stepped forward to break his wandering gaze. There's one other thing you need to know. Those 2 people that tried to kill me are from the traditionalist faction? Affirmative. I naively made the mistake telling them about your existence, thinking that it would silence them. Since you're untrained in our ways, unlike your father, they see it as the perfect chance to take control. Typical bad guy behavior. Which means your plan is to protect me and teach me your ways. Glad you picked things up quickly. He shrugged and sat up, but regretted it almost immediately. The lightheadedness from blood loss dropped him back to the bed. Easy plot to follow. And since I'm going for a bingo, my power is really strong? I'm not sure. Your father was the strongest one of us in centuries. It's my hope that you are. Close enough to count it. When do we get started? Chapter 8. Routines. Silence. A peaceful morning arrived. At least coming out of sleep. The early arriving sunlight broke through the curtains. Its warmth helped as much as the alarm to stir Saki awake. She reached her hand over to the clock. A simple small analog clock with just a single button. Saki slowly pressed it down to end its call. Her fingers settled into the smooth, well-used surface. The plastic cover for the clock hands marred with scratches and a crack a third of the way through. A bit of the outer plastic chipped away where it had fallen one too many times. Saki stretched a little before sliding out of bed. Her hand brushed back a few strands of hair, barely longer than a pixie cut. Cleaning up the covers, she glanced over at the other beds still deeply occupied. Once she finished making her bed, she walked over. Time to get up, Nori. She spoke softly. It took a couple of calls before her little sister moved. Though as usual, it was just turning in her sleep. Taking a more direct approach, Saki petted her head, getting her to stir. Slowly coaxing her out of sleep took a couple minutes more. Mornin'. A slow yawn came out of Noriko as she finally opened her eyes. Is morning now? Sleep slurred her words adorably. Yup. Gotta wake up. Okay. Saki stepped away. Early morning prep continued as she waited for Noriko to get up. By the time Saki cleaned up and changed clothes, her little sister walked out of bed. The short 9-year-old kept rubbing her eyes. Helping her through their routine, Noriko finally had the energy to operate on her own. Saki sat down starting her stretches. Noriko returned in similarly designed casual shorts and a loose shirt, but in a pink and white pattern to Saki's black and blue. Dropping down, she eagerly began trying to match what Saki did. Unlike Saki, Noriko lacked the years of practice, even being younger and likely more flexible. Saki guided the same as always when she failed. As Saki stretched, Noriko kept up her energy, as though it recharged her. By the end, she bounced around Saki. Saki tried to settle her down before they went out for breakfast. It didn't work. The bouncing feet creaked the old wood in the hall. Saki walked with a lighter step, seeing the table already prepared. Her father sat deep in a cup of coffee. Behind Noriko's cheered greeting, she replied as well. "Good morning." As they arrived, their father looked up. A young by appearance Japanese man dressed in a semi-formal attire prepared for work already. "Morning, you too. Sleep well?" He leaned over to help Noriko finish pulling in her chair. "We did stretches." "Oh my, your commitment is encouraging." "Commitment?" "Hard work." He gave her a pat on the head and smiled. She grinned wide back, swaying a little while waiting. Saki politely sat down on the opposite side. Hands in her lap, she waited for breakfast to come. She watched him dote on her little sister as time slowly passed. He turned over to Saki when it looked like Noriko had settled down enough. "How's the new school? It's been a month already. Where does the time go?" "Not much different. I heard you joined the track team. After all the time at the dojo, I was surprised you picked track." Before she could answer, the food arrived. A simple fare consisting mostly of egg and bread. Behind the food, their mother stood with a stern expression. Shoulder-length semi-graying dark rust-colored hair tied back. Several wrinkles already began to develop along her eyes and mouth. "It was just for self-defense, Hachiro. After everything she went through, you can understand. Track's something more practical for her to pursue. Naturally, if that's what Saki wants. I know you threw yourself into it." He looked over to Saki for confirmation. She nodded briefly, cutting into her food. "This is what I picked. If you're having fun. It's only been a week or two. Be sure to enjoy yourself." Yes, dear. You don't need to pressure her." Their mother pushed the plate a little closer to him. He took the hint and stopped. Once their mother sat down, the breakfast carried on with relative silence. Saki finished quickly and moved to get ready for school. With some alone time, she stared at the mirror in her room. Thoughts strayed between past and present. Nothing held for long. Reflections ended when Noriko crashed the room. She hurried over to Saki's bed to get the ribbon for her. "Thanks, Nori. Want me to help you get ready?" "Yes, please." She bounced up and down in front of her sister with her arms up. A small giggle came from Saki. When it came to exit their apartment, Saki heard from the kitchen the familiarly repeated phrase. "Be safe and don't go near him." "Yes, mother. I'll be going." A few blocks over in the neighborhood and early morning once more, there was a distinct lack of earthquake-style bouncing. Not that in his sleepy state he would have been able to discern the difference. No, dreamland kept Yuki well comforted away from reality. Especially, anew said reality that sleep might be fending him from currently. Lack of bouncing aside, some movement or shifting was happening. In the borderline between sleep and reality, he made no sense of the difference. But what snapped his enchanting melody of fantasy dreams was the fact that it felt off, wrong maybe. For good or bad, his little brothers made it their habit to wake him up in the morning, most times before his alarm even got a chance, sad alarm noises. The different feeling this gave him sliced through his dreams. Through those sliced dreams, his ears heard a soft voice whisper to him. "Master Yuki, Master Yuki." Yuki nodded his head, feeling the tickling of the breath, but rolled over to keep sleeping. Just a little longer, sis. Since it didn't sound as urgent, clearly he had more time to sleep. Naturally. Master Yuki. The voice persisted in his ear, making it twitch. A sudden weight pressed on him, when calling out to him failed repeatedly. Master Yuki. Momoko, Ken, why are you both? He attempted to move around, but found it to be difficult. Normally, his little brothers, while great at making an impact, couldn't do anything yet to pin him down. Yet they managed it? Momoko did? He was really confused. That pulled him further into reality when the covers came away. With reality and his eyes starting to open, he picked up more of his surroundings. An unfamiliar sweet aroma danced in the air. Something that didn't make any sense for Momoko, at least in the morning. Momo? When you'd start wearing perfume in the morning? Master, you're awake! And why are you calling me master? He stared through his blurry eyes at a face that he could only tell was a woman from the voice and long hair. He blinked once and wiped his hands over his eyes to clear his vision. Once sight had been returned, before him was a beautiful young woman in a maid costume straddling him, staring only a few inches away from his face with a warm, pleasing smile on her face. Oh, a maid! Of course it was a maid. A dime a dozen knockoff from any anime or light novel that he could think of from the last 3 months. Nothing strange about seeing a maid. Nothing? What? A maid? He jumped back up, nearly crashing into the woman before pulling back, breathing heavily. What's a maid doing in my room? Master? Why, yes, he said nervously, trying to work through what was going on. I'm still dreaming. This is just a dream. Why, yeah, and I just need to wake up. Yuki pinched himself and looked up to find the results to be no different. He slapped his face and punched himself, thinking he needed more pain to wake up, but nothing had changed. Master? Yuki pulled back in his bed, trying to put some distance between her and him. She continued to follow him until he fell out of his bed, dropping his back painfully. A few books dug into his back now as he found himself in an all too commonly familiar scene. If it wasn't for the panic and confusion running through his whole mind and body right now, his young male adolescence might have actually enjoyed it. A long shining blade suddenly beamed over him, touching his neck. The point of it was very real, making him cough cautiously. Yuki! As a samurai of honor, I challenge you to a duel. And the cliché scene suddenly flipped into non sequitur. Yuki tilted his head over slowly to see a man standing before him, standing in full samurai armor from the Edo period. He began to sweat at the sight, as well as the katana at his throat. Dark panicked shadows painted over his face as this new threat. An assassin? In samurai armor? What's going on here? The man pulled back his sword, looking like he was waiting for a reply. Yuki took the opportunity to leap away from the woman and crawl into a corner away from both of them. His eyes darted quickly between the two of them, watching what they did carefully. What's a samurai and a maid doing in my room? You are part of a group of people who can rewrite the laws of the world to create anything that our imaginations can come up with, said Ayumi's voice in Yuki's head suddenly, remembering something. The words from her story pitch came back to him, and he began to piece things together. Anything my imagination can come up with? He looked at the maid and nodded to him. Yeah, she looks almost exactly like the maid out of I Quit My Dead-End Job When a Maid Fell Into My Life. The maid started to approach him again, looking like she wanted to do something. I made her? Like a waking dream? Is this how it works? He didn't know how it worked. The samurai stood, getting impatient for a response, katana brandished in a demanding angle. What am I supposed to do? How do I turn it off? Yuki closed his eyes, hoping that it would disappear, but when he opened them again they remained. He shut his eyes once more. Turn off. Turn off. It's not working. What do I do? Yuki began to become panicked again, seeing the maid get closer to him with the samurai taking a frightening stance against him. He tried to think back to the night when he used his powers. How did I do it before? Focusing too hard on it made it disappear. Yuki stared at the two really intently. They became the only thing in his vision. Unfortunately, the samurai apparently took umbrage with his stare and took 2 steps forward as though the challenge was accepted. This isn't working. Ayumi! I really wish you were here to tell me how to turn this off. Crawling a bit against the corner of the wall, he stood up. It's mind powers. Think. You've watched and read so much anime, something in your brain's got to have an idea. Rapidly, Yuki did a mental file search through his media knowledge. Pressed for an immediate answer, he stopped the search at the first idea. He winced. This was not a good idea, but definitely an idea. And backed by an unquestioningly unhealthy consumption of anime carried some validity. It still made him pause. A loud crash followed next with a thud. Yuki lay partially unconscious on his bed, eyes turning into spirals, dazed. Shards of the unfortunate lamp scattered around his sheets. His door opened, showing an overeager Ken and June. Are you playing without us? They rushed through the forest of books to his side. Snapping back to attention, his eyes darted over to where the samurai and maid were. Neither could be seen. A sigh of relief came to him as he pulled himself back up to greet them. I would never play without you two. I was trying to surprise you when you came in to wake me up. Did it work? Chapter 9. Troubled Joy. Samurais and maids, if asked, he would say definitively that he liked them, possibly even loved. Honestly, it was a mood thing. His enjoyment of such staples of literature culture ebbed and flowed, waxed and waned. At least, before today he felt that way. Now, he hated them both. Well, maybe not hate, perhaps that was an over-exaggeration spurred on by recency bias. One of them did just try to kill, maybe harm, him. The other, he honestly didn't even know. He certainly hadn't read anything last night. So he could only guess what inspired the maid. And given the sliding scale of maturity, it could have been anything. And he didn't really know if he was actually ready for the extreme side of that, even if the books he read might be considered wish fulfillment depending on the day. He groaned a little coming out of his room, still reeling from the events. I can't believe that they just popped up in my sleep. How long were they there? Ayumi didn't say anything about this. I can't live like this. Sitting down at the table, his mind still worked on clearing itself, and his heart trying to slow down to a normal pulse. A tug on his sleeve grabbed his attention. Oh, I'm sorry, Ken. Did you need something? It's June. Oh, right. Thanks. He looked over to June, who stared back quietly, mute as ever. I'm sorry, June, I woke up with a headache. Oh, nothing bad, thanks for worrying. After the one-sided conversation, he stood up and walked around the table, patting him on the head before going into the kitchen. He pulled out the bread from the cabinet and put a slice into the toaster. A glance from Momoko inquired silently. June, he wanted toast along with breakfast. Don't spoil him too much, Yuki. I'm only giving him one. He's looking forward to your breakfast. He moved around Momoko, stirring one of the pots as she tried to hurry and finish. Afterwards, he pulled down plates and bowls. Ken! June! Quickly, 2 pairs of feet scurried with boundless energy at the summons. He bent down a little. Mind helping set the table? Yes, please. June, you get the bowls. Thanks. He watched them mindfully walk away, aware of their delicate cargo while still looking like they were jittering bouncing balls locked in a cage. Yuki straightened out his back and went back to aiding Momoko, mind and body finally feeling better. You're gonna need to work on your June reading skills. I'm not always going to be around. I'll just video chat with you. Image quality holds up over phones, right? You lose that in-person touch. I don't know how you manage it. It's the wrinkles in the forehead and muscle tension in the neck. Each one is a letter or word by itself. Momoko glanced over at him. hearing him matter-of-factly deliver it straight. A wide grin shined back for her. Honestly, no idea. I told you before, doesn't make any sense. I just hope it's something that he comes out of in time. You and me, both, but it's already been a year. By the time Yuki closed the gate, a deep simmering panic started to roll in over the back of his mind. One he vocally tried to shout away, internally. No maids, no robots, no brains, stop it. Just stop it. So much mental energy fought to keep all of his errant thoughts in check. He really didn't need a maid or something worse popping up in the middle of the street. However, when he began to walk into the street turning towards his school, there was a heavy weight on both of his arms. He looked down and jumped back in surprise to find that both Ken and June had followed him. Yuki knelt down looking at the two with hopeful eyes. What are you two doing? June remained quiet as Ken stepped forward as their voice. June wanted to walk with you. So we decided to go to school with you. It'd be even more endearing if it wasn't an obvious lie. Yuki couldn't help but give him a warm smile. He patted the two on the head. I don't mind you coming with me as far as the stop sign. But Ken, what have you told you about lying? I wasn't lying. He looked over to June for assurance. A small shy nod came in return. June can't speak. June can answer yes or no to questions, Ken said, looking a little too proud about the counter. A small chuckle came out of Yuki realizing the game Ken played. All right. Just try not to take advantage of your light brother too much, Ken. So we can walk with you. Yuki nodded and gave them both one of his hands. They bounced eagerly on the offer. Morning, Yuki, Saki said from behind him as they met at the usual spot in the path. When she came closer, she saw his brothers with him as well. Oh, Ken and June are with you today. She bent down, pulling her skirt in as she lowered herself to their eye level. Saki gave June a pat on the head and a warm smile. Still as cute as ever, June. A snappy turn had her facing Ken, giving him a mischievous grin to match the one that was on his lips already. Tagging along with your brother, huh? Yup. Ken raised his left arm in earnest. Don't forget we're going as far as the stop sign. You'll be late otherwise. The presence of Saki risked them forgetting everything. They already started to try to climb up and around her with little encouragement needed. I'm relieved she still plays with them despite everything that's happened. I feel bad they don't get to play together anymore like before. They walked down looking almost like a brother and sister taking their younger siblings to the park, which honestly, if Ken made the decisions, it'd happen. Unfortunately for him, Yuki kept them on track despite how much fun Saki had with them. She put them both back down as they reached the stop sign. Saki knelt down, patting them. You can walk with us again whenever you want, you know. Really? Hear that, June? Ken rose up, both of his hands cheering, and ran off down the other street with June running after him. They disappeared around the turn of the street, leaving Yuki and Saki alone to resume the rest of their walk. Yuki stretched a little and turned to face Saki. Keeping his usual smile painted over his face, he greeted him. Good morning, Saki! The moment his brothers disappeared, the panic returned twofold, noticing that he had dropped his guard. Morning. What's wrong, Yuki? You feeling all right? The sudden voice knocked her back a step. He waved his hand and arm together, motioning off her worries. Yup. Just worried with Ken and June pulling you 5 different directions so early in the morning. Something's a little off. I don't think he's lying, but hiding something else maybe? Saki smiled back. If he had something else, she could wait until he was ready. They're fine. It's no worse than they used to do. Chapter 10. Short 1. Saki doubted that it was anything serious that caused Takako's absence from practice. She didn't have many morning practices, so she didn't know much about the girls that only went in the morning. However, it was strange for Takako to be gone. Few minutes remained until class began. There was enough time, if she was quick. Let's go check her homeroom, Hitomi. She might have skipped for some reason. Hitomi rushed up to Saki, unable to shake the panicked expression on her face. The first big meet is coming up. What reason would she have? It was pretty clear that Saki didn't have an answer. If Hitomi had been thinking straight, it would have been obvious, but it felt like a request. I don't know. We'll ask her reasons when we find her. Saki stepped forward around the girl. She took her hand and hurried together. Saki's class, 3A, was left behind at the end of the hall of the third floor. Along the floor were all of the first-year classes, with many of the students still hanging around outside of their classrooms. The classes ran the east side to 3D with windows opposite. Past 3D, the hall widened with classes on both sides. The last of the first-year rooms stopped with 3J. Takako was in class 3H near the opposite end of the building and through the crowded hall. Saki arrived at the front door for 3H. Hitomi continued on to the back door. The panicked girl went into the class, not fearing the students. Saki remained outside looking in. She stayed cautious about the number of students that she did not know. There were only half of the seats filled and several standing up talking. It made it difficult to look around. Plus, Saki barely knew Takako. The girl wasn't going to stand out to her immediately. Unfortunately, she could not see her in the room, and Hitomi returned shortly afterwards. Any luck? No, I couldn't find her and no one has seen her. I'm worried. Well, class is starting soon. Everyone misses classes once in a while. After school we can check on her at her house. There's probably a reasonable explanation for it. Saki began to walk back for her own class, but was stopped by a shaking hand on her arm. She looked back to see Hitomi's face wrinkled in worry, still not satisfied by the brief look that they had made for Takako. Hitomi, we can't give up. Saki's face turned a little to frustration and pensiveness, still confused by the whole situation. She had been helping Hitomi out, because she was worried. However, this seemed to be going beyond just rational concern even for simple friends. There is something strange about the whole thing. Why is Hitomi so caught up by Takako missing one day? People do react differently, I guess, but this feels too extreme. Rational thought didn't appear to be a top priority. A few more seconds was all Saki needed to see Hitomi wouldn't give up. Weighing her options, she could be cold and leave. Things would get weird between them during practice. Other paths went through her mind. A quick listing of her choices left her with one clear reality. She would be late to class either way. Let's talk to the teachers. Maybe they know something. The new idea calmed Hitomi. A little of the fear that gripped her eased. All right. Saki helped Hitomi through the hall and downstairs to the teacher's office. Here all of the teachers stayed before classes would begin in the morning, or if they didn't have a class for a period of the day. It was normally a place that students would avoid and stay out of without permission, but Saki needed something that would settle Hitomi down. This was the last chance that they had. Hitomi looked at Saki upon their arrival. Will it be all right to go in? She stared at the door of the teacher's office as though it were an ominous creature that would attack if she so much as touched the door handle. It'll be fine. We're just asking about a student. Saki realized it would be up to her to take the initiative. She grabbed a hold of the door's indented handle, pausing for a second. A wave of dread washed over her from knowing that this was not a place that she belonged. The moment passed quickly for her, and she tightened her hand against the handle and pulled it open. The sliding of the door alerted a couple of the teachers. Is there something you need? Said one of the male teachers, approaching Saki with a couple notebooks in hand. It was a teacher that she had not seen before, no doubt for one of the upperclassmen. Saki swallowed roughly, suddenly feeling more out of place than she would have thought. She tried to bow politely in apology, even in failing. I'm sorry. We're looking for Class 3HS homeroom teacher. The teacher pulled back, giving Saki a comforting smile to try to not make her feel nervous. Oh, you're looking for Mr. Akutagawa. He's still here, but class is starting soon, you know. Saki and Hitomi nodded quietly to the teacher, but remained at the doorway not wanting to enter any further. Well, I'll go get him for you. What is it about? Oh, it's about Takako Yamazaki. She hasn't showed up today, and we were concerned she might be sick or something. If so, we thought she might need someone to deliver her homework to her, if she is sick. Saki hoped it didn't look clear that she lied. Normally it wouldn't be something that bothered her. Lying to a teacher felt worse, but she just had to remind herself it wasn't that bad of a lie. All right. The teacher walked back through the aisles of desks towards one of the teachers, whispering to him. Saki remained watchful while still trying to hold back the uneasy feeling. A minute later, Mr. Akutagawa approached them. The Class 3H homeroom teacher was a young man in his late 20s wearing the usual suit that most male teachers did. He seemed kind from his warm expression. Hello? Mr. Shimomura was telling me that you were worried about Miss Yamazaki. Yes, we're her track mates and haven't seen her today and didn't know what happened. Have you heard anything? I actually had just gotten off the phone with her mother. She is staying home today, having come down with something. I'm told it shouldn't be too bad. Just keeping her out of school for a couple of days. Oh, thank you very much. That's very relieving. Are you okay, Hitomi? Saki looked behind her to see what reaction that she was having from the news. It was nothing to be worried about, just a normal flu or something. There did seem to be some calm brought to Hitomi, but her face was still heavily covered in concern. Mr. Akutagawa picked up on this quickly and stepped forward, looking towards Hitomi. If you want, she'll need her homework taken to her. I would normally have someone from her class do it, but... Thank you, Hitomi said slowly, beginning to finally come to ease. Well then, you can stop by here at the end of school and I'll give you her assignments from all her teachers. You should be getting back to your class though. The last bell is about to ring. Right. Come on, Hitomi! An undefined relief came over her, stepping away from the door. She pulled Hitomi along until she was able to walk on her own. Saki left Hitomi when they reached the 3rd floor, letting her go to her classroom. She ran back to her own room, hearing the bell ringing for her. The halls were empty for her, but that only signaled a deeper panic for her, knowing how late she was going to be. She softly attempted to slide the back door to her class open to not pull attention to herself, but that turned out to be a futile effort. She cautiously drew her eyes forward, seeing the cross expression of Ms. Kuniyashi staring her down. The attempt at a sheepish, innocent look had failed her just as quickly, leaving her cornered. You're late, Miss Furukawa. I'm sorry, Ms. Kuniyashi. Saki fled to her seat, trying not to pull in any more attention to her than she had already drawn. The teacher glared a little longer at her, and then continued on with roll call for the class, the reason that Saki had failed so miserably. She dropped her head down on the table, exhausted from the morning already. Yuki leaned forward from his seat, having watched the whole thing unfold, and tapped Saki on her shoulder. What happened? I'll tell you at lunch. He leaned back in his chair. His mind divided between holding his mind in check and pondering Saki's little adventure. The exhausted look made him curious to know what happened. Guess I'll wait then. The lunch period came for everyone, a normal one this time, relatively, of course. Yuki and his friends walked up to the roof of the school. A few other groups shared the space when they arrived. The warm air and cool breeze made it enjoyable to be outside. They still had time before they could change to their summer uniforms as well, so it made things more bearable as well. Yuki pulled at his dress shirt's collar underneath to relieve a little stuffiness. Hiroshi sat down next to Yuki, undoing all of the buttons on his coat, and placed his lunch in his lap, looking eager. On his other side, Kazuhiro and Tatsuya sat down. Kazuhiro sat next to Yuki opposite Hiroshi, sitting down slowly with Tatsuya following up behind him, forming a semicircle now. They both knew Yuki through Hiroshi, and in part became like friends. However, Yuki remained the new guy in their group. Tatsuya remained a little cautious still with Yuki. It seemed a little weird how easily Hiroshi got along with him. The rumors surrounding Yuki, not to mention the constant people out for revenge, there was more going on than the smile Yuki always presented. But Hiroshi liked him, so he trusted his friend's judgment. Opposite of them were the girls. This time it was only Saki and Ayumi. Only Saki in the group held an inwardly pensive look. Despite everything inside, Yuki kept up appearance like Ayumi did. Yuki slowly ate through his lunch before looking up at Ayumi, and then to Saki. He remembered then that he had wanted to talk to her about the morning. "Hey, Saki! You said you'd explain what happened this morning?" "Oh, yeah, that was unusual for you since you're usually attached so closely to Yuki," Hiroshi said with a mischievous grin that looked like he was asking for trouble. Saki nearly choked on her lunch, pounding on her chest to get the food down. She grabbed a sip of her juice to push down the rest of the way. The look from Hiroshi, knowing that he hit a nerve on her, made her cross her brow. "I was helping out someone from track. I ended up losing track of time." She went back to eating, leaving her explanation to go no further. "Oh, I see. Makes sense." Yuki continued to eat his meal as well, watching Ayumi sitting quietly minding her own business, looking innocent and lost. I guess for being a foreigner she knows Japanese culture pretty well. The food all looks pretty normal. Though I don't know what I was expecting to see. Knowing about the lie, it made him watch the others more. He wondered if hints of cracks appeared in their face like stepping on thin ice. Nothing gave away any signs they doubted her presence. Apparently, her little Jedi mind tricks worked as well as advertised. Honestly, he had to consider himself in that brainwashed equation. He knew nothing, just as them. When the end of school came for them, Saki was pulled away by Hitomi like a dog on leash. She had practice, so they had no plans, but the urgency felt a little strange. It just made him wonder further about what was going on that she was being pulled away. But he currently had more things juggling in his hands than he could manage. Curiosity had to sit out for the moment. He looked over to Ayumi, as she walked up next to him. She maintained her lie that they always walked home together. "We need to talk about this morning, Ayumi." Yuki started walking through the hall with her in silence. Fortunately, nothing more happened today. He didn't know if his focusing on not thinking worked, or if he just got lucky. The whole superpower thing came as a new thing. Reading a library's worth of manga and light novels apparently didn't grant the user perfect mastery. Who would have thought that things didn't work like the books? Out on the city streets, Yuki broke his silence, now under the safety of noisy sidewalks. "Thanks for that. You had excellent timing. You sense my power or something like that. You read too much of that stuff you call manga. It doesn't work the same way in the real world." "Real world?" "Yes, something you'll be learning more about." "So no power sensing?" Her brow twitched with him still hung up on that part. "No. In theory, you could probably create a law that would serve that function, but that's extremely limited." "Limited? How?" "Out in the streets isn't the best location for long explanations like that." She scanned the horizon and environs for ideal locations. Nothing stood out. Shops risked too much eavesdropping. Sidewalks had variable safety. A mental check gave her a solution. "The park 2 blocks west of here. Let's go there." The plan had been track practice in Saki's mind. However, the moment Hitomi appeared, that changed. Hitomi dragged her in front of the coach and begged for them to get the day off. She explained to him that she wanted to deliver Takako's assignments to her immediately before it was night, and she would be out too late. The coach wasn't nearly as understanding as Mr. Akutagawa was about her concerns. Understanding, however, wasn't needed with enough pressuring. Tears helped too. Now dragged out to the west side of town, Saki felt out of place. She never traveled to this part of the city. And the money in the houses made it pretty clear why. Some almost looked like they were out of a TV show she had seen. It only increased her sense as a foreigner. Hitomi maintained the lead, marching with surprising purpose. A stark change to the girl Saki witnessed this morning. It made her wonder why she was even needed. But Hitomi insisted and went through all the trouble. Saki couldn't turn her away, even confused by the whole thing as she was. Maybe she hoped for answers. The deeper into the wealthy properties they went, Saki felt like she needed to leave. You sure it's this way? These houses are pretty expensive looking. I don't think she lives here. Overbearing gates and lawn presentation made the neighborhood uninviting. She didn't know if Takako was rich, but it never seemed to come up. Hitomi didn't listen very well to Saki marching on, looking at the paper that showed the address. This way. She disappeared around the corner, leaving Saki to catch up quickly before she lost sight of her. When Saki caught up to Hitomi, she had already stopped staring up at the gate before them. This must be her house. You haven't been here before. Did you know she lived here? Takako never mentioned it before, but she was usually pretty quiet about her family. I'm going to ring the bell. Hitomi leaned in, pushing the button on the panel that was built into the brick wall that fenced off their property. An annoying buzz came from the button that sounded off until Hitomi released it. A minute later, a reply came over the speaker. Yes? We aren't interested in anything you're selling. The voice was deep and old with a little crack in the speech. It made the two girls step back, expecting that they would see someone rather than a voice. I'm sorry. Hitomi searched for the courage to speak while Saki kept a placid face, trying to look like she belonged. We aren't selling anything. We're classmates of Takako. I see. Well, Miss Takako is not here currently. Hitomi looked back at Saki as though she was expecting an answer to explain what she was just told. It was plainly clear to her that the instant glance at Saki told her that she had no answers. She turned back to the speaker. What? But we were told that she was sick. We have her assignments for her. You may leave her things in the box. I'll inform her of your visit. Thank you. The voice ended, and a clicking sound that seemed to tell them silently to leave. What does this mean? The school says she's sick and her family says she's out. Hitomi looked back at Saki, wanting something from her this time. She was at a loss as to what was going on, but there was something being hidden by someone. Saki had no more of a clue to what was going on than Hitomi, but it had been made clear to them that someone was lying. She did not know why they were doing it, but this was not going to be as simple as she thought anymore. What's going on? If you enjoy the story, please leave a like and comment to let me know you want more. Make sure to support the author by liking the official story page on Royal Road, link in the description.